Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. Each episode, I will give a new guest a chance to discuss their background, culture, interests, or whatever they want to talk about to help increase all of our own worldviews. Today, I would like to introduce you to Kyleigh Weathers. Kyleigh was born a lesbian and raised a Mormon, and she was caught at 16 with a girlfriend. She served a mission for her church and was kicked out for being a lesbian. Kyleigh came out a year later and had a wife within 2 years, and then was married to a man. She's the creator of Queerly Attached, a business dedicated to providing attachment trauma recovery resources for LGBTQ plus folks. So Kylie's here to talk a little bit about her life and what she's got going on. So thank you so much, Kyleigh. Why don't you tell the audience more about your story?
Hey, what's up? Thanks for having me on. This is, I'm excited about this one. I've been doing several interviews just because of my business, Queerly Attached. And what I like to share as far as my story goes is when you listen to this story, I say that my story is a story of self-abandonment. And I'm going to define self-abandonment. For me, that means to disconnect from myself to make sure that I stay in connection with others. Right? Whether that's relationship, friendship, parents, whatever that is, it's a disconnect from my own needs. It's crossing my own boundaries. It's people pleasing. It's a lot of insecure attachment strategies that we are using in order to stay connected. So self-abandonment just kind of drove my life because of how I was born and raised, right? I was born, I say a lesbian because that is something that used to make me cry. Like I couldn't say that without tears. And it is because of the culture that I was raised in. I grew up Mormon, and my family was very Mormon, very faithful. We did the things. There was it's a high demand religion. And realizing at 16 that, hey, girls are actually kind of great was difficult because in my mind, that's when the self-abandoning really set in. That was the moment of like, I don't fit in this box. And I have to. Well, one, because I have to. I'm 16, right? And there are so many stories of actual families kicking people out for these things, right? That was a huge risk, and it wasn't one that I was willing to take. And so I hid for a long time and learned to just really throw into my religion. And I really enjoyed it, if I'm honest. I think that I'm not really out here like hating on the church. The church is really part of your culture, and it did make me who I am. And there are things that I've learned through that experience that made me a better person. But the biggest thing that I learned was to self-abandon. After getting caught, it was like everything just flipped. My parents were loving in their way, right? They wanted me to be forever with them. And in the Mormon church, that means we can be together forever in heaven, right? And if I'm gay, can't do that. So it was a loving response in that they wanted to make sure I stayed on that path. And so, the bishop, repenting, therapy, pray the gay away, all of that started. And I tried really hard. And I ended up serving a mission. Guess where I went?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. The first location that came to mind for whatever reason was New York, which don't know where that came from.
That would have been cool. Well, so that's how, when you receive your mission call as like a young LDS Mormon person, right? You don't know where you're going. It's kind of a surprise, right? So I was very surprised that I got called to serve my mission in Argentina, and I was really stoked about it. And not once was I ever like, I wonder how it's going to be with this secret on a mission with another girl 24/7 as a companion. Not one time. I just really thought that it wasn't going to be a problem. It turned out to be a problem, and I only ended up serving for 6 months. And I came home. And, this is one thing I haven't talked about yet. So I'll go this, since we're sticking with self-abandonment on this story. I used to think that the reason why I confessed, because I didn't get caught on my mission, I confessed. And I used to think at the time, the reason why I did that was because I knew that I couldn't stay and handle the guilt of holding that in for the next year. I could not fathom feeling this way for the next year. it was too scary to imagine. I also had just been called to be like a leader in that area, and I was terrified to do it. I had a real fear of failure. And I know now, looking back on it, the reason why I confessed was I was afraid of what was going to happen next. I knew what would happen if I did that. I took like, I'm going to just confess and get sent home early, which means being sent home with like dishonorable. And I had to have a disciplinary council right there in the mission where we talked about everything that went on, right? I chose that over just hiding because of what that was going to make me feel. So I did get back home and kind of hung on to the church for another 6 months. And then I just decided it was just too hard. It was just too hard to just not be gay. I mean, the truth is, y'all, like, you just can't do it. Like, it just isn't a thing, you know? And so I ended up coming out, and I was terrified because I knew that I was going to lose a lot. And I did lose a lot. But I ended up meeting someone, and we got married, and actually she was also an ex-Mormon. So we kind of had that thing in common. And, you know, she ended up going back to that church, and it was heartbreaking. And what's crazy about this part of the story is that I was also back in the church within a month. Like, wild, right?
Mhm.
Wild. Like, within a month, I was right back there. I wasn't happy about it. But when she made that decision, it was, again, losing everything. Losing everything. I had already lost community, lost family, right? To make this choice. And then when she makes this choice, now I'm losing again. Making the choice to go back to the church immediately got me community back. It immediately connected me back to my family. I was not allowed, but it's like we were able to still be friends, right? Like, every lesbian wants to be friends with their ex. Like, we all out here trying it. And so I got all of that back by self-abandoning, right? I mean, I see it now and it makes so much sense, right? It makes so much sense now, but it ended up completely diverting my path, right? I completely ended up doing the Mormon wife life. Do you watch The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives?
I do
Are you
not,
into like reality
but
shows
I
at
have
all?
heard a little bit
I'm
about
telling
it.
you, somebody in your audience watches that shit. Anyway, so I did end up doing that life, and I met a fantastic guy, and we were married, and we had a fantastic kid, and um, it it was the Mormon life. And you know, it wasn't. People ask me a lot, like, "How did you do that?" You know, it wasn't that it was like hard per se. I really did believe these things about this church, but there was, I call, just like these inner parts inside of me that were definitely feeling like abandoned, not heard, not validated, dishonest, shame, guilt. Like, it was a lot, and it caused a lot of anxiety, and like just unrest. And so when I left the church with him, thank goodness, having a mixed faith relationship can be really difficult. We already had a mixed orientation marriage, so that would have been twice as hard, right? We left together, and once we left the church, the way that my co-parent describes it is that it was like, he says it was like this cloak just got pulled off me. Like, oh, there she is, right? And from go, he was always supportive and has continued to be. Like, we are fantastic co-parents. We decided that choosing the like known safe life was really like choosing a half life. Like, we both were willing to like do the unknown, right? Which was for me to literally just be like, yo, I'm a lesbian. And it took therapy for me to be able to say that, because I had my own inner homophobia, you know? Like, I say like, it was weird. I was like this dual thing. I was like a homophobic, yet gatekeeping lesbian. Like, I wasn't gay enough, or, you know, it was definitely a sin or whatever. And so I ended up having a fantastic co-parenting relationship. I can see his apartment from here. We are 2 buildings away, and my son runs between us, and it's beautiful. And that doesn't mean it doesn't come without conflict. But because, as you can hear, there was a lot of conflict in my life. Like, communication and conflict are what I'm about. I love like teaching people how to connect first back to self, so that you can connect to others. Like without those two things, it's not an emotionally safe relationship, right? If you don't have trust within you, how are you out here trusting other folks, right? And that's the thing that led me to Queerly Attached. Was on this journey of self-abandonment, I finally heard about attachment styles. I was reading a book and I was reading this explanation of what an anxious, preoccupied attachment style can sound and feel and look like. And I saw myself immediately. And I was like, oh, damn. And it was like that whole story I just told you clicked into view. And I was like, oh, wow, 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 wow. And it changed everything. I ended up just really becoming what I just said. Like I was just an attachment geek. Like I just couldn't get enough of it. And I learned how our beliefs actually drive us, right? Like when you really break it down, like your beliefs, whatever they are, whether they're limiting or not, those are going to lead to a thought. And typically the thought then just leads to a feeling. And when those three things come up, a belief, a thought, a feeling, something engages, and it's usually a strategy. It's going to be a secure strategy or it's going to be an insecure strategy, but you're going to take action based off those three things. So how freaking important are our beliefs? Like really, like how important is that then? So if I'm walking around believing, what? I'm not enough. I don't matter. These are all core wounds that happen when we get hurt, right? If I'm not enough or I don't matter or no one listens to me, I'm going to believe that and I'm going to see that all around me. Do you struggle with any of those?
Yeah, I mean, similar sort of things, but I totally understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, like if you believe that and then you think it and then you feel it, yeah, you're going to have to do something to then soothe that whole exchange that just happened. That is what I learned to do, and it has just shifted everything for me. Like it has actually created this. It has felt like alignment where it was almost like I had this disconnect. Like mind, body, and spirit, I believe whole, like that's what embodiment is. And I for sure had a disconnect between mind and spirituality after I left the church. I was definitely just like, I don't want any of it, fuck it all, like just nothing. And so my mind just kind of took over at that point. Well, then I had a spinal cord injury when my son was 6 months old. It left me paralyzed and changed the next 10 years of my life. That moment disconnected me from my body because now I believed my body betrayed me. I can't trust my body. I will continue to get hurt. I've had 5 back surgeries and this is my 10th year since this injury, right? For 9 years of that, every time around that time of year as that thing was coming on, the feelings, the rage, reading the Facebook memories as they came up, like it, just March and April every year is a bad time for me. And so when the 9th year came up, I made the decision. I asked you this before we recorded. How do you want to feel about it? Well, I asked myself that. How do you want to feel on this 10-year anniversary? And I decided not this way. I don't want to feel it like this because I know what this feels like. The anger was so intense. And what do you do when you're angry? You start snapping at people. Like it was literally during that time of year, you could see it was driving me, these beliefs, these thoughts, these emotions around this event. And I read this book, and I'm going to tell you the title of it. I'm going to grab it because I always keep it here. The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. This guy basically challenges you to start observing the voice in your head instead of listening and believing it. You know what I mean about voices in your head?
Mm-hmm.
That guy that just like, or I always say guy, I don't know why. I mean, that voice that just like all of a sudden you realize you're listening to a script of something and you're like, what? He encourages you to back up basically and just watch that guy. Like, who is that? Who is it? And be curious about it instead of just like, yeah. Right? You start agreeing with it or you start fighting with it. Like you can have whole exchanges in your head with these voices. And when you observe it and get curious about it, that's when you start to find this healing, right? That's when you start to understand like, oh, I can decide how I want to feel about things. That's crazy. Like that really means you're the creator of your own peace. And that means you're empowered to create whatever future you want. So I decided I don't want to feel like this. I want to feel empowered. I want to feel confident. I want to not be angry. The 10th year came this year and I felt exactly that. I achieved my goal. because of this work that I started doing. I started doing this attachment wound healing. I started learning how to not just like have grief, but hold grief. I learned that the thing that caused this loss 10 years ago, actually, I had caused even more loss because of the way I was thinking about it. Like, that's wild. Like, I caused myself suffering even more. That's crazy. Like, that is crazy to me. And so I was just like, I'm not going to do that anymore. Why would I harm myself in this way? And changing those thoughts and how I feel about it, I stopped calling my leg my bad leg. I stopped calling my back my bad back. I started calling my healing leg and my healing back. I have a pain pump. I have a spinal cord stimulator. Those are the things that have me up on my feet. But when I tell you that my pain also has changed, I know it's because of this thought. I think about my pain differently and my pain feels different. I am a chronic pain person. I have pain daily, but thinking about it differently has changed things. And I would have knocked myself out 2 years ago if I'd said that to myself. It sounds absurd, doesn't it?
I mean, a little bit, but
Yeah.
the internal work is just so important. So I think, kind of hearing that story and how your mindset has changed over the past 10 years and hearing where you came from before that, I want to go back a little bit because you talked about kind of why you originally left the church, why you went back to the church. You then got married in the church. The leaving process with your co-parent now, what kind of sparked that? Because then your kind of cloak came off and you could be the lesbian that you were kind of denying. What kind of made you get onto that path?
Well, once we left the church, it became this question of like, okay, what do we believe about some of these things, right? Like some Mormons practice what's called the word of wisdom, which is like no coffee, no alcohol, no, right? All these things, right? We had to ask ourselves, okay, how do we feel about that, right? And he was out, and I think by the second day, he's like, I'm gonna go grab a 6-pack. Like, we decided pretty quick, we were cool with these things, right? And so that continued. And so I had not been watching any queer content, for sure, was not watching anything that was going to be like bringing that thing up. And so, sorry, the reason why I love your question is because I say to people that we talk a lot about coming out and we don't talk enough about being in, because that really is where the trauma occurred, right? So being in was like this suppression, repression, like it just was dark. And so having that cloak come off was like, oh, I can watch gay shit now. Like I can do and interact with, any of that stuff. And I did. And I'm going to shout out Gentleman Jack, which is a HBO show that came out. And it was about this like legit, like 19th century lesbian, like straight up. And it was super empowering to watch this like historical, there was fiction parts of it, but this show about this woman who just claimed who she was. And I ended up in a podcast, actually, like kind of community that was about that show, and a bunch of queer folks. And just being in that community, it almost just was kind of like, it just started awakening that thing. Fortunately, my co-parent and I have always had good communication. Like that's something that has always been important to me. And being able to connect through conflict instead of contending through conflict, like that's my jam. And so we already had a relationship like that. And so as this thing started, I mean, it just became a question of, okay, what do we feel about these things? What do we feel about monogamy? What do we feel about, and so opening the marriage, always a risk, right? But what I love about the way we opened our marriage is that we both came at it with this idea. We have no control of the outcome, first of all. We know what we hope for and we know what we desire, but we are accepting that this may have a different outcome. I also love that at the point that we opened our marriage, we were doing so well. Like you would always hear people like, don't do it when you're doing bad. And I believe that. Like, why would I want to add more relationships if I'm already struggling in one, right? And so we were doing fantastic. It was really great. But opening the marriage meant, okay, I can go date and connect with women. And the thing I missed most while in my marriage was emotional connection. It was what I needed most. As an anxious, preoccupied person, emotional connection is so important. And we will self-abandon quickly when we think that there is a loss of self-connection or of connection with others. And so as soon as I kissed a girl, basically, it was pretty clear, like, nope, yep, okay, this is more, this was never a phase, y'all. Mormonism was the phase. Like, this was not a phase. And it wasn't something that was like surprising because he knew we'd had conversations. He knew about my past. Like, we had all of those conversations. That wasn't sprung on him, right? We just continued to be, if that makes sense. Like, we just allowed each other to be who we were. And it hasn't been like without conflict. But I don't shy away from conflict because I know the connection and self-discovery that comes from it. Like, it just is more worth it than avoiding it, right? I'm not avoidant. I'm definitely more on that anxious side. Now I say I'm securely attached. I've earned it. I've learned it. It's a practice. But avoidance sides will just not even talk, right? We're going to stonewall. We're going to ghost. We're going to just anything to avoid discussing feelings and conflict. My co-parent, I believe, is a secure person, and that helped as well. He has always just been this like grounding force, if that makes sense. So there was never any like love lost between us. We decided that this family that we had built was still going to continue as family. And that's what we've done. And he has a partner, and he's his girlfriend. They've been together for 3 years, and it's been great. It's very like, I guess, modern family. But when we definitely after opening the marriage, it was pretty quick when we decided, okay, like I really am a lesbian, and we're not going to be together, right? And I mean, I'll say it this way: when I U-hauled. My co-parent drove my U-Haul. That's what I say. I ended up moving to Kansas City for a relationship, and he was supportive and drove the damn U-Haul. So I'm very fortunate. I will say that it takes from both of us just being able to show up vulnerably. And without vulnerability, you really can't have authenticity. And when you don't have authenticity, you have a lot of room for confusion, chaos, assumptions. So I just seek clarity. I just seek clarity in my life and make sure that the actions I take align with that.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that the good communication foundation that you two had, along with kind of his support for you being who you are, is kind of what led to co-parenting being even possible, that it is a good situation? You know, your kid can go back and forth very easily, because you hear so much about co-parenting just being so difficult.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it is. I when I say that I have a fantastic co-parenting relationship, that is not me speaking on ease. Okay? It's not always easy, but I accept that as my reality, right? Like, when we actually accept our reality, then we don't have to deal with the friction of our false realities that we're trying to jam into, right? Like, when we don't just accept this is what things are, and figure out how you're going to move through that with peace, like you're just spinning your wheels. And so I don't know if it was like I said, he and I didn't have an emotional connection. So it's not that we had this we didn't have a lot of conflict when we were married. The conflict began when, okay, we're going to separate. Now, what does that look like? And we knew it's not going to look like arguing. We had never argued in that way. It's not going to look like screaming, in front of our son. He's never been yelled at in that way, right? We decided, like I said, how we wanted to feel about it, how we wanted it to look, and then we took action to meet those goals. Like, it really is just deciding, what do I want to feel like? You've got to look at your values and see if the choices you're making align. Otherwise, it's just like freaking like sandpaper on your skin for no reason. Like, let's just hurt ourselves. Like, it's silly, but it's how we're taught to deal with things.
Mm-hmm. And so then, you had to maybe say, like, come to terms with the fact that you are a lesbian and figure out what, that meant for your future, and accepting yourself and not continuing to abandon yourself. So what were, like, how long did that really kind of process take you?
We could probably do it more in therapy session count. It took therapy. I really had such a high degree of self-hate around it. A lot of shame had been built into it. I am fortunate that I kind of feel like I was also born with this sense of like this seeking of higher self. I've just always had that. I've even before the injury, I've always worked in mental health. I've always done some form of therapy. I was a recreation therapist, and I worked at the VA. I worked with at-risk youth. Like, I loved my job, right? And then the injury happened and changed everything. But this has always kind of been who I am. It was the piece with the attachment style. It was the piece with this thinking. Those were the things that really made it click. And fortunately, all of that lined up with this moment. All of it lined up. I read about attachment styles in my very first polyamory book. It's called Polysecure. Totally recommend. Like, it absolutely teaches you about attachment style, which you need to know about if you're going to engage in relationship, especially if you're going to engage in multiple relationships. Understanding how you show up in connection is also going to help you understand how your partner shows up in connection. Like, it eases connections. It doesn't make it easy. It's just like a way to ease it, because we can see, all right, some of these strategies are looking pretty insecure. What was the trigger to that? Right? Every time you get like, let's like pretend, listen, you and I, we've been friends for a long time, right? And I do something that disappoints you. How does that make you feel?
Disappointed and like frustrated that, you
Right.
did whatever it was.
Yeah. And you probably would talk to me about it, right? But first there's that feeling. Like, first you have to deal with the fact you were disappointed and that you're upset, or whatever the word was. You have to first deal with that. Otherwise you're just skipping to the like healing part, but you can't. Like, you have to feel the heal, right? Like, it really does have to go in that order. And so learning those things enabled me. One, he is absolutely someone who, how do you say? He kind of jokes that he's just, it's like a laid back joke. He says something about like, if I was any more laid back, I'd be upside down or something silly. I don't know. He's from Georgia. They got all kinds of sayings, but he's just very chill, and that helped as well. Right. But we just kind of learned and did it together as we figured out what we wanted it to be. And it's been really beautiful. And my son is 11 now. So it's been 4 years, and he is obviously very grateful, and he's very aware that this is a very conscious choice. I'm going to rec one more book. It's called Conscious Uncoupling. Is that what it's called? Conscious Uncoupling. It's a great book that will kind of teach you how to do this if you are like breaking up and there is a need for you to continue in connection, if it's children or if it's finances, whatever it is. Accept the reality. That's happening. This is happening. You're going to have to move forward in some way with this person. So you got to figure out what it means, because what you make it mean matters. What you make it mean becomes the belief, and then the belief, right, moves us forward to action. So you decide what it means. We always get the chance to decide what something means. Make it mean something that aligns with your goal. You're going to hear me say it 100 times on this podcast when you re-listen, but that is the trick. It's got to align with your actual desire.
And so, in aligning with your actual desires, if you're willing to talk about it, what has your dating life been like since coming to fruition about being a lesbian?
Oh, I love that question. Well, okay, I mentioned the U-Haul. So all of that was being learned, right, as I moved into this relationship that U-Hauled here to Kansas, right? And then continued learning about attachment through that relationship. So I have been single now for almost a year. And when I talk about that, it's crazy because I had not been single since 2006. And you just heard at least 2 marriages in there, right? And there's a lot of other people in there. I did everything subconsciously to stay in connection. I kept myself in connection. Being single, like, it wasn't like I understood that I was scared of it, but I was scared of it. And so arriving at single, but arriving at it with this like learned secure practice. Oh my gosh. I say I'm securely single. I'm dating the hell out of myself. My life is not determined on partnership. It just isn't. And here's why. Same thing. I'm going to go back to it. When I realized single was here and it's now, I had to accept my reality. I wasn't going to make it mean what it used to mean, because I knew that would just drive me down a path that didn't align. So what is it going to mean? Okay, it means that we're here, and how are we going to deal with it? How do you want to feel in the future? I imagined myself legitimately. I was like, if I were to be like on my deathbed and I'm still single, or I'm unpartnered, or whatever it is, I do not want to lay there and be upset and feel like just how unconclusive my life was, or inconclusive, or just knowing that if I continued feeling this way about not being partnered at the end of my life, it would be determined based off that. And I'm not willing to give that control away. That's mine to control. Anytime you're going to like join connection with someone, you understand there's another control now in there and you don't have control of their control. So I was like, no way, no way. I want peace no matter what my relationship status is. So started the steps to make that happen. I'm here. I feel that way about it. Absolutely, there are things that I miss. Absolutely, there are things that make me feel lonely, right? But who cares? What do? I feel it. I let the loneliness feel. I find the thought that it's attached to, find the belief, and we see the wound. Oh shit, this is actually that I don't feel good enough. I don't think I'm ever going to find anyone. Like whatever those beliefs are, I'll go find it. It's just another moment of self-discovery, really. It's just like being curious about it. So that's how I've continued just being securely single. What I hope for is this. The way I see my life is this path, right? And anytime we make a choice, there's these other paths that pop up. And also, every time you make a choice, paths disappear, right? So I know the path and I know what I want to do on it. What I hope for is that as I'm walking this path, I'm obviously going to be, I'm very collaborative. I'm very like, let's gather tribe. I love community. I love like just being in groups. So I'm going to have other people that I see along my path. I hope that at some point there will be someone walking their own path that I'm like, hey, look, it looks like we're walking the same way. That would be dope. But I don't want anybody like jumping on my path or like me jumping off my path to go on their path. Like, no, let's just, hey, if we're walking the same way, why not? And there's no attachment for me on the longevity of relationships now. Like it lasting forever is not my goal. My goal is to not self-abandon and to not date people who do. It's not fair. I don't want to do it. That's not right. I'm going to show up honest and vulnerable. I'm not going to accept manipulation because that's what it is, right? When we people please, we're trying to manipulate. Let's be for real about it, right? We're trying to manipulate what they think about us. I mean, just honestly, the self-discovery, I feel like meeting yourself is also like meeting humanity. Like it has made me understand perspectives other than my own actually in such a better way. And so when you kind of have that frequency and that energy, you do draw that type of person in. You're also very aware of like what your standards are, what your boundaries need to be. You don't just push through things when your boundary has been crossed or when you're feeling upset. You don't just hide it, right? Like you trust yourself and you understand that no one else can disrupt your peace unless you allow it. That doesn't mean you're a doormat. Right? We're going to speak up for ourselves. We are absolutely going to say what our needs are. We're absolutely going to know what our boundaries are. That's creating peace. And you get to see when you set a boundary, what are these people reacting to? Like, how do they react to it? And you notice. Those are the things that you're looking for.
And so then as you've, learned your boundaries, you've become secure in being unattached and you're not abandoning yourself. What is it that kind of led you to start this business supporting others?
Well, what led to it, I'm going to just say it real, is after my injury, I was put on disability. My injury took my job from me, right? Here comes the script, right? My injury took my job from me. My injury put me on disability, right? Okay, I still have pain every day. I'm actually docked for an MRI because they think it's time for the fusion. That was true 10 years ago. It's true now. Like the fusion is coming. I can be upset about it or I can accept that as my reality. Being on disability is exhausting. It just is. And you just don't, it's a scary feeling that it's so dependent, right? I can't go get a 9-to-5. I can't. And absolutely, I would love to go back to school to get my MSW and be a therapist, but that's not the path that my life took because of this injury. And so what does that mean? That means I got to create my own path. And I've always been a coach. I feel like I was born a coach. I'm also my son's baseball coach right now, which is also a dream come true. Like I never would have imagined that could have been possible. And so as I started to understand these principles, I got certified in integrated attachment theory, which was a coaching program in 2022. I still wasn't ready to coach it yet. And it was because I was still doing kind of my own I call it research, to be honest. I was still kind of figuring out me. Anything that I coach is something that I've done, right? That's all a coach is. It is different than therapy. That's all a coach is like, oh, you have a goal? Sweet. I have a practice plan. Let's show up and practice this together. So that's how Queerly Attached kind of became born, was as that last kind of piece fell into place, which was the thoughts and the emotions and how to observe the voice. It was like, yeah, let's just go for it, man. Like, this is a huge leap of faith. But I know that honestly, I believe that I have this inner purpose to teach how to connect in healthy ways. I just see it everywhere. Obviously, I'm in the queer community. I feel like the queer community, I have not said this yet, but the queer community is why Queerly Attached exists. Everything I just spoke works on no matter what your orientation is, okay? But the queer community is dealing with another layer of attachment wounds. Society rejecting them, parents abandoning them, religion telling them that they're wrong, right? We have a whole other set of things about attachment that is sending messaging all the time, particularly when we're in the closet, okay? That shit gets moved into relationship. Chaos, back and forth, push-pull dynamics, all of that, U-hauling, all of it, the back and forth, the breaking up 100 times, and then the repair that's not really repair. It's so prevalent, and it's all coming from these attachment wounds, and those can be reprogrammed. Those can be healed. And honestly, it's not that difficult because the power is within you. Like, it's yours. I'm just going to cue you into it. Does that make sense? Like, it's actually super effective. It doesn't take much, because the truth is, this is something you get to practice every time you have a feeling, every single time. And if you're in connection with someone, that's going to happen often.
And so what was it like for you to decide to go out and start this business? Like, we've heard the why, we've kind of learned about your path, but then like actually taking the steps to be like, I'm going to start coaching.
So scary, because you know why? One of my main limiting beliefs was that I would be like fake if I was a coach. Like, you're not as good as a therapist. You know why that was a limiting belief? Because coaches aren't fucking therapists. Sorry, that sounded bad. Coaches are not therapists. We're not. So yeah, it makes sense that belief isn't true. So I had to work through that belief. But again, I can reprogram my subconscious mind. I just can't outwill it, right? We can reprogram it. We can't outwill it, because the subconscious is constantly trying to keep us protected. That's the whole job of it. And so starting it was terrifying, because imposter syndrome, number one, right? Oh my gosh. Like, everybody has imposter syndrome. I don't feel like we talk about it enough. Facing up with that fear, and then also the imposter just coming in, that's so much voices. There's so many voices. I would not be able to have created Queerly Attached if I was not doing this practice in my own life. What I've taken on is extremely overwhelming. It can be stressful, right? So I have to know how to deal with these things. It wouldn't be sustainable if I couldn't. So I, one, stayed in therapy. Two, I hired a coach. I resourced the fuck out of myself. I knew that starting my own business was going to bring up limiting beliefs, and I knew that they would be difficult to break through without someone else helping me do it. And so I hired a coach. I hired a mentor. These people have helped sustain me through this. I am a person, I never wanted to be a solopreneur. I also never wanted to be on disability, right? I was very good at my job as a recreation therapist. I had a good government job, and I had a baby that was 6 months old. None of that was what I desired, but that is my reality, and that is my situation. So doing something so just, this is the scariest shit I've ever done in my life. And I do not enjoy social media. So basically, trying to grow this through social media is also bringing up so much. Like, it brings up stuff that you just would not imagine. And I'm so glad. Like, I've always been the person who's like, ooh, that looks frightening, and that I may discover myself, and I jump. Like, always. I think that I feel like the joy that I get from being curious about myself, like all the interest I ever had in someone else, I'm putting that interest into me and seeing what comes from it. And that grounds me. Like, if I understand what it feels like to be emotionally safe, I know that I can be safe in connection, because I trust myself. And it will have nothing to do with that other person. I trust myself. If something starts to feel unsafe, I'm not going to stay in an unsafe situation. I won't self-abandon anymore, right? If I'm not feeling this inner peace, I've got to do something, because that's what I want to feel. So something's got to change. And the trick is it's you that has to change. You got to stop waiting on anyone else to do it.
Yes, you've done lots of inner work, figuring out who you are, figuring out what your values and mission truly is. So it sounds like, a lot of good work, and putting yourself out there, starting this business is definitely a different journey. Now, before I start to wrap things up here at the end, is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners?
I think what I would share is that I think it can sometimes sound like a lot. And if I can give one final takeaway, it would be these two pieces, right? It would be the next time you feel triggered, pause and take a breath. That alone is going to change the next moment. If you can pause instead of letting that chain go through, right? The belief, the thought, the feeling, the action. Like if you can pause and take a breath, take a good breath, inhale through the nose, exhale long through the mouth. That's going to send signals to the body that, hey, we're safe. We got this, right? You got to send that signal, because otherwise this trigger brings up that part who's like, I got it. I'm here from the subconscious. I know which strategy to use to move through this moment as fast as possible. We don't want to do that. Like, we don't want to just be out here surviving. Like that's not it. We want fulfilling, thriving, like situations and relationships. So pause, take a breath.
That is so important in so many facets of life, so many different situations you can find yourself in. So I think that's a good piece of advice here at the end. Now, at the end of all my episodes, I do ask my guests a random question. So my question for you today is, do you prefer cities or rural areas?
I like the I'm going into town kind of feel. Like, I'm going into town. I'm 10 minutes out of town. I have had that situation in my life, and I absolutely loved it. For a moment, we lived in Idaho on 7 acres, had a view of the Tetons. It was gorgeous. Yeah, I think it would be rural areas for sure. I even lived in an RV for a little time. We loved it. So I like to travel. I don't like to be really super tied down. Rural for sure. Time to think, space to breathe.
All right, that brings this episode to a close. Of course, if you'd like to connect with Kyleigh, her website will be in the description, and along with, her social, she is queerly attached everywhere. So that will all be in the description. Her website also brings you to a free attachment quiz if you want to learn more about yourself. And soon in the future, she is releasing a podcast, which will also be on her website. Of course, if you'd like to connect with our podcast, our website is in the description as well. It brings you to all of our social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So if you want to go like those pages, it also brings you to all of our guests' past social media resources. Also in the description are going to be the 3 different books that Kyleigh mentions. Those titles and authors will be there if you want more research on those topics. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, my email is in the description. That is always the best way to reach out and connect with me. And if you'd like to donate to the podcast monetarily, there is a link to do that as well. So thank you so much, Kyleigh, for spending time with me today, and to my listeners for taking the time out of your day to hear a new story. Until next time, bye.
Bye.